Marcy stood at the front desk of a Buckhead hotel, leaning on the counter like she belonged there, and a tight heat climbed up my neck. She wore the black blazer I'd bought her for Christmas, the one she called work only, and she laughed at something the man beside her said. My name is Heath Caldwell. I was 57 years old, married to Marcy for 27 years, living in Decatur, and I'd walked into that lobby thinking I was finishing one last errand I'd already planned. Instead, I watched my wife check in like she was starting a vacation. He wasn't a coworker passing through. Clean haircut, new shoes, and that confident grin young guys get when they think a woman's attention means a shortcut. He looked about 33, close enough to my daughter's age to turn my stomach. I didn't storm over. I slid behind one of those oversized lobby plants with my phone in my hand, pretending to scroll. Marcy's fingers rested on his forearm, casual and practiced like I was the stranger. I called her right then, with my eyes on her face. She answered without looking around. Stop calling, she snapped. I'm checking in. Then she hung up. About 12 feet away, she flipped right back into her polite smile and handed the clerk her ID. The lie wasn't the hotel. The lie was how easy it was for her. I hadn't walked into that hotel on impulse. By then, I'd already spent days gathering records and making sure the end, when it came, would rest on paper instead of an argument. Watching her settle back into that polite smile, I realized this wasn't going to end with a fight in a lobby. It was going to end on paper. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive cologne, and it hit me how normal everything looked around me. Nobody screamed, nobody pointed, and that was the scary part, because my marriage hadn't blown up with a bang either. It had gone quiet first, like living next to someone who kept the lights on but never looked me in the eye. Marcy's career took off in those last few years, and she wore it like armor. She was a regional director for a fitness chain with clubs all over Georgia and the Carolinas, and suddenly every conversation was about standards and optics. She traveled constantly, flashed a corporate card, and talked like our house was one of her locations that needed better management. When I tried to joke about it, she'd tilt her head and say, Heath, don't make this weird, like I was the one changing. Around that same time, my company restructured and pushed me out of my client manager role. I found enough work to stay afloat, but it bruised my pride, and she saw the bruise even when I tried to hide it. In public, she'd squeeze my arm and tell people I was figuring out my next move, but at home she'd toss out little lines that cut deeper. We need you stable, she'd say, like I was a risky investment and not her husband. My birthday that year was March 9th, and I wasn't asking for anything big. I wanted a call, a card, something that said I still mattered in her day. She texted me at 7:06 that evening. Long day, we'll do dinner another time. And that was the entire celebration. When I brought it up the next morning, she didn't even pretend to be sorry. You know how busy I am right now, she said, and she walked out with her travel mug like that settled it. After that, the little behaviors started stacking up. Her phone stayed screened down, and she'd take sudden walks that always turned into calls in the garage. She changed her perfume too, something sharper that didn't smell like her. And when I asked, she snapped, "It was a sample, so don't start." Then came the Savannah runs and regional audits. And at first I didn't question it because travel was normal for her job. But her stories got thinner, like she'd memorized them instead of lived them. One morning I was paying bills and saw a hotel charge that didn't match the city she'd claimed. It wasn't huge, but it made me stop and stare like I'd read the wrong exit sign. I didn't confront her, because I didn't want to hand her a chance to smooth it over with that polished voice. I called my buddy Reed Lawson instead, and he picked up like he'd been waiting. I said, "Tell me if I'm losing my mind, because something feels off and she keeps acting like I'm the problem." Reed didn't dress it up, not even a little. "Heath, I'm not trying to hurt you, but you're describing someone who's built a whole other routine without you," he said in the same steady tone he used for bad news. That night after Marcy fell asleep, I pulled our phone records and account history with my laptop balanced on my knees. I hated doing it, and my jaw stayed tight the whole time. But the pattern was right there. One number kept showing up. Late nights, early mornings, weekends she said she was wiped. So I wrote it down on a sticky note and shoved it into my wallet. The sticky note in my wallet felt heavier than it should have, like it was pulling me toward a decision. I didn't want revenge, and I didn't want a shouting match Marcy could turn into a story about me. I wanted paperwork and a clean exit, so I called Marlo Vance's office in Decatur and asked for the first opening. Marlo's place smelled like copier paper and hand sanitizer, and she didn't waste time. "Tell me what you want to happen," she said. I slid my folder over and answered, "I want this done without yelling, and I want it documented." She asked, "What can you prove, what can you afford, and what are you willing to tolerate?" I stared at the desk and said, "Less than I used to." She started the filing and warned me, "Don't confront her yet. Let facts talk and don't hand her a scene she can weaponize." At home, I built a timeline on my kitchen table like I was assembling a cheap piece of furniture. Travel dates went on one side, charges on the other, and I circled mileage reimbursements that didn't match the routes she claimed. I printed a few calendar invites she forgot to delete and stapled everything in order until it looked undeniable. That number I wrote down finally got a name through our shared phone plan: Blaine Mercer. I confirmed it on our home tablet when Marcy's work contact list synced without her thinking, and there he was under her region. The part that tightened my chest was realizing I'd met him at a cookout the previous summer, right in my own backyard. He'd laughed too hard and said, "Yes, sir, you're a funny man," while Marcy stood beside him smiling like it was normal. I kept my behavior normal on purpose because panic makes you sloppy. I didn't snoop in her purse and I didn't follow her car, even when every nerve in me wanted to. I went to my part-time job at the Municipal Cultural Center, worked the front desk, and nodded at neighbors like my house wasn't falling apart. A couple days into it, Tamsin called from her grad program. She was 29 and direct. "Dad, Mom sounds amped lately. Are you two okay?" I kept my voice level and said, "Your mom and I are not good, but I'm handling it." Tamsin paused, then said, "Please don't shut me out." I told her, "I won't." By the time I reached out to the Buckhead Hotel, I wasn't trying to catch Marcy. I was trying to end the debate before it started. I'd already spoken with Nadine Park at the front desk and arranged a quiet handoff of a sealed envelope the moment Marcy came back to the desk. I tucked the sealed envelope into my folder and set it on the passenger seat like it was just another errand. I didn't dress to announce anything, because attention would only make the whole thing messier. I wore jeans, a clean button-down, and regular shoes, then grabbed my keys and walked out of the house with my shoulders squared. Traffic into Buckhead was the usual Atlanta mess, but my head felt quiet, almost sharp. I parked, stepped out, and the heat coming off the pavement hit my face like a slap. When I walked through the hotel doors, the air turned cold and smelled like polished stone and money, and I kept moving like I had a right to be there. When Marcy and Blaine headed for the elevators, I walked to Nadine Park, slid the sealed envelope across, my attorney's return address clean on the back, and asked her to hand it over the next time Marcy returned to the desk, quietly. Nadine agreed to confirm what she personally saw, and I left before the elevators even closed. In my car, my hands were steady on the wheel as I started the engine and drove off. That evening back in Decatur, I walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer with the old paperwork we never threw away, slipped my wedding band off and set it on top before pushing the drawer shut. I left the bedroom and went straight to the kitchen because I needed my hands doing something normal. I rinsed a glass, wiped the counter that didn't need wiping, and sat down at the table like it was just another weeknight. The house was too quiet, and I kept my eyes on the doorway instead of the clock. Marcy didn't come home soft. The front door hit the frame hard enough that I heard it from the kitchen, and a second later her heels cracked down the hallway like she was marching into a meeting she planned to win. She came in holding the envelope like it was a personal insult, and her face was red, but her eyes stayed sharp and focused. "You had your lawyer drop paperwork on me at a hotel," she said, and she didn't ask it like a question. She threw the envelope onto the table, and it slid until it bumped my water glass. I stayed seated because standing up would have turned it into a contest. I looked at the envelope and then at her. "You got the papers, and that's the point," I said, keeping my voice flat on purpose. She scoffed and did that quick shake of her head like I was a difficult employee. "You are acting unhinged," she said. "He's on my team and we were talking work." I didn't raise my voice because calm makes liars itchy. "Work doesn't need one room and two keys," I said, and I watched her mouth tighten like she'd bitten something sour. "Work also doesn't need you hanging up on me while you smile at the front desk." She shifted fast because denial only works until the other person doesn't flinch. "This is about you," she snapped. "You're embarrassed about your job and you can't handle me succeeding. She leaned forward a little like she wanted to push me back into my chair with her words. That one stung because she'd been planning that idea for a while, like it was a fact we both agreed on. I didn't bite anyway. This is because you lied to my face and used our life like a cover, I said, and I didn't look away. She laughed, but it came out thin and tight, like it hurt her throat. So what, you followed me now? She asked, and I caught it right away, the setup. She wanted the story to be me stalking, me controlling, me unsafe, anything except her getting caught. I shook my head once. I didn't follow you, and you know it, I said. I planned it, a lawyer planned it, and a hotel employee witnessed it. When I said Nadine's name, Marcy's eyes shifted. Just a flicker, but it was enough. Witnesses ruined fake stories, and she knew it. Her voice dropped into something colder. If you try to ruin my career, I will make this ugly, she said, and she meant it like a promise. I pushed my chair back slow and stood up without slamming anything. I'm not ruining anything, I told her. I'm reporting facts. She went quiet for a beat, and in that beat I grabbed the small overnight bag I'd already packed from the hall closet, walked out the front door without another word, and drove straight to Reed's place. Reed's porch light was on when I pulled into his driveway. I grabbed my overnight bag and walked up before I could talk myself out of it. He opened the door, looked at the bag, then looked at my face. Guest room's made up, he said, and he stepped aside. We sat in his kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee, even though it was late, because neither of us wanted to pretend this was normal. Reed leaned back in his chair and said, "You did it the clean way." I said, "I did it the quiet way, and she's gonna hate that." Reed nodded once and answered, "Quiet makes liars desperate." I slept a few hours and woke up to my phone buzzing beside the bed. It was around 9:30 in the morning, and the number wasn't saved. I answered anyway, because running from calls was Marcy's move, not mine. A woman said, "Mr. Caldwell, this is Human Resources with Core South Fitness. We need to ask about a report involving an employee at a Buckhead hotel." I sat up and said, "Tell me what you're alleging because I'm not guessing." She replied, "The report says you harassed an employee and created a security concern at that hotel." My stomach dropped, not from guilt, but from how fast Marcy moved to turn this into a campaign against me. She didn't report her affair, she reported me, and she wanted me labeled unstable before I could open my mouth. Reed was at the kitchen table, jaw tight, listening. When I hung up, he said, "She's trying to flip the board and make you the threat." I called Marlo right after, and she didn't sound surprised. "Good," she said. "Now we keep it factual." She told me to write a statement with clear times and actions. When I called the hotel, when I arrived, where I stood, and that I never approached Marcy or Blaine in the lobby. "No opinions," she added. "Just what you did and what you didn't do." I opened my laptop at Reed's table and typed the statement, then emailed it to Marlo and saved a copy in my folder. After that, I called Nadine at the hotel and kept my voice calm. "Nadine, if you're asked, can you confirm I requested a quiet handoff and didn't cause a disturbance?" She paused, then said, "I can confirm what I saw, and you stayed calm." While I was staring at the sent email, Tamsin texted, "Mom says you're acting weird and showing up places. What is going on?" I called her right away and said, "Your mom is rewriting this and I'm not following her anywhere." Then I told her, "I filed for divorce, and I'm not going to trash her to you, but I won't lie either." By mid-afternoon, I stopped thinking about how angry I was and focused on what I could prove. I stacked my documents, clipped the statement on top, and zipped my folder into my bag. I slung the bag over my shoulder and left Reed's house with the folder zipped inside it. The drive to Sandy Springs felt like I was carrying a stone in my chest, but I kept one rule running through my head. Facts only, no heat, ever. Marcy's corporate office was a glass building with a spotless lobby and a security desk that made you feel watched even when nobody stared. Everyone had a badge and a polite smile, like it came with the job. I parked, sat for a moment, and told myself I wasn't here to argue with my wife. I was here to make a report that would outlive her charm. My palms were dry on the wheel, and I made myself breathe slow before I stepped out, because shaking hands looked like guilt. I brought copies, not originals, because Marlo had been blunt about it. "Never hand over the only copy," she'd said. "Control the chain." At reception, I asked, "Can you get me Sloan Barrett, HR Director for Ethics and Compliance?" The receptionist lifted her eyebrows and asked what it concerned, and I answered, misuse of corporate travel and a supervisor-subordinate relationship. Sloane walked out with a locked-in face, professional and cold, and she led me into a small room without small talk. She shut the door and said, "Tell me what you're alleging." I slid the folder across and said, "Marcy Caldwell used company travel to cover personal meetups, and the person involved was her direct report, Blaine Mercer." I added, "There's retaliation already moving because HR called me this morning about a harassment claim." Sloane's pen moved fast. "Dates and locations?" she asked. "And how did you get these details?" I said, "From shared household accounts, card charges, and phone plan records, plus a timeline of her travel and reimbursements that do not match." I pointed to one page and said, "A Buckhead hotel employee, Nadine Park, can confirm I requested a quiet handoff and I never approached anyone in the lobby." She didn't react the way people do when they hear cheating. She reacted like someone checking boxes. Then she said, "We already have an open audit," and my stomach tightened, because that meant this wasn't just personal. Sloane looked up and said, "I need you to confirm this report directly in a leadership huddle briefly." I nodded and answered, "I'll confirm it, but I'm not here to perform." In the conference room, Marcy sat at the table like she was about to present numbers, calm mask on and eyes forward. When she saw me, the mask slipped for half a second, then snapped back into place. I kept my voice steady and said, "I'm reporting documented misuse of company travel and an improper relationship involving a direct report." And I walked out. I kept walking until the glass doors shut behind me and the lobby noise turned into muffled air conditioning. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright, and I didn't look back at the building because looking back would have been a mistake. I got in my car, set my bag on the passenger seat, and drove off like I was leaving an appointment, not a marriage. I wasn't in that building for the fallout, so I only learned it in pieces. The first piece hit my inbox before I even made it back to Reed Street. It was an acknowledgement email from Sloane that said, "Receipt confirmed. Review is pending. Do not contact involved employees directly." And the plain tone made my stomach tighten in a different way than anger. Marlo called not long after, and she sounded sharp but steady. "They opened an internal investigation," she said, and then she added, "They also noted your wife's complaint about you, but we already responded with facts." I asked, "Did HR buy her story?" And Marlo answered, "They are required to log it, not required to believe it." The next piece came through Reed because people talk when they think they're being discreet. He got 2 separate calls from folks in that office, and he put one on speaker so I could hear the tone without the names. Reed said, "They placed her on administrative leave pending review, and that was fast." And I felt my shoulders loosen just a little because fast meant she didn't control the room anymore. Then came the second twist, and it wasn't Marcy. Blaine didn't protect her, he protected himself. And that told me everything about the kind of man he was. Marlo relayed what Sloane told her. Blaine had already emailed HR screenshots and chat logs to cooperate, like he was racing to outrun the blast. According to what was shared, he claimed Marcy pushed the relationship and dangled promotion tracks. And whether that was true or not, the move was obvious. He was building a lifeboat out of her reputation. Another coworker, someone Reed knew through a cousin, said Marcy tried to turn the meeting into a performance about me. She called me unstable and resentful, and she leaned hard on the idea that I was showing up to scare people. The problem for her was dates, security timing, and Nadine's confirmation, because witnesses don't care about charm. The audit angle mattered too, and I hadn't even known it existed. HR had flagged odd travel patterns already. Savannah runs with no club visits logged, meals outside policy, and hotel stays that didn't match regional schedules, and my folder gave them names and motive in one clean stack. Marcy called me 3 times that week from a blocked number, and I let it ring every time. Then she texted, "You think you won," like marriage was a scoreboard and not a life. Tamsin got dragged in again, and she called me crying after Marcy told her I was destroying her career. So I kept my voice level and said, "Your mom made choices, and I documented them." In the weeks that followed, Marcy's public line became, "We're separating for personal reasons," and the real story stayed locked inside HR files while the rumors moved the usual way. Reed heard she got moved out of management and resigned not long after, and I didn't celebrate it. I printed Sloane's email, slid it into my folder, and snapped the binder shut. Not long after the hotel handoff, the official service happened the normal way through a process server. But by then, the letter had already done what I needed it to do. It ended the pretending, and it shut the door on Marcy's favorite trick, which was talking in circles until you forgot why you were upset in the first place. When Marcy called after that, her voice kept changing like she was trying on outfits. From there, the divorce didn't come with fireworks or instant relief, because Georgia didn't do clean breaks when assets and retirement accounts were involved. It turned into months of documents, mediation dates, and that dull ache of untangling a life one form at a time. One week she wanted a second chance. "We can fix this if you stop being so extreme," she said, like my problem was having limits. The next week she wanted to punish me financially. "I'm not signing anything that leaves you comfortable," she snapped, like comfort was a prize she got to award. Marlowe kept me steady when my patience ran thin. "Do not negotiate with moods," she told me. "Negotiate with numbers and let the paper hold the line." We sold the Decatur house and split what was fair, not what felt fair. That difference mattered when I was angry, because my feelings wanted to swing a bat and the law wanted a calculator. I learned to lean on the process because the process didn't care if Marcy cried or smiled or threatened. It just moved forward. I moved into a small townhouse in Kirkwood with 2 bedrooms and a small patio, and it had no echoes of that family photo wall Marcy curated like a magazine spread. The first night, the silence pressed against every room, but it wasn't loneliness. It was space I could breathe in without waiting for the next cold comment. I kept my job part-time at the County Cultural Center, working the front desk, selling tickets, and scheduling rooms. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and people walked in for concerts and art shows and kids' programs like their lives were normal. Nobody cared who my wife was, and that was a gift I didn't know I needed. Reed stayed close without smothering. He'd wave me into his shop, hand me a sanding block, and talk about normal stuff while I worked my hands until my head stopped racing. Tamsin took time, but she came around when the noise died down. When she visited the townhouse, she looked around and said, "You seem lighter," and I answered, "I'm just not pretending anymore." Marlowe told me later HR closed Marcy's harassment claim as unsubstantiated, partly because her story didn't match hotel security timing and Nadine's account. The last mediation session landed in late October, and Marcy looked tired for the first time in years. She stared at the paperwork and said, "I didn't think you'd actually leave," and I told her, "I left a long time ago and you just didn't notice." Then I picked up the pen and signed the final page. I capped the pen, slid the signed page across the table, and left the mediation room before Marcy could say anything else. Outside the building, I breathed in and out until my chest stopped buzzing. Then I drove back to Kirkwood in silence. It had been 8 months since I moved into this townhouse, and I still fell into old habits. I would open a cabinet and reach for the bigger coffee mug like someone was about to walk in behind me and complain about the dishwasher. Then I would remember it was just me, and I would keep moving anyway. My days were smaller now, but they belonged to me. I worked a few shifts a week at the County Cultural Center, covering the front desk and helping set up rooms for concerts, art shows, and kids' programs. Some nights there was live music, and I stood in the back letting the bass thump through the floor without explaining a thing to anyone. Reed checked on me without making it a big deal. He joked, "You're retired adjacent now," and I'd answer, "I'm chasing steadiness, not titles." He said it like a tease, but he meant it like permission. Most mornings I walked, did my grocery run, and kept my bills simple enough that sleep came easy. Marcy and I only texted when we had to, usually about leftover paperwork or something tied to Tamsin, and the tone stayed polite but flat. Warmth without trust was acting, and I was done acting for anybody. I heard from mutual contacts that Blaine moved to another company out of state. I didn't track him, but I did think about how fast he turned on Marcy the second his own future felt shaky. That told me what kind of man he was, and it also told me Marcy never had real loyalty on her side, just convenience. Tamsin and I talked more than we had in the last couple years of the marriage. Not every day, but steady, and she didn't play referee anymore. She was just my daughter again, and when she called, she asked about my week instead of asking me to translate her mother. Sometimes my mind jumped back to that Buckhead lobby, not the humiliation, the clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't required to keep everything smooth at the cost of my dignity. People asked if I was dating, and I told them, I'm learning how to be visible to myself first. I spent too many years shrinking my needs so the house stayed quiet. And I didn't want that kind of quiet ever again. If you wanted to call it revenge, it wasn't ruining her life. It was refusing to be rewritten as the villain. She tried to paint me as a stalker and a jealous husband, and I answered with timelines, receipts, and calm. That held, so I rinsed my mug, set it on the rack, and turned off the kitchen light.